literally in the last days.
4 signs left for the return of Jesus.
That's the mark of the beast. That's the Antichrist.
We're witnessing biblical prophecy.
Mark won't be able to buy or sell
unless you bear the mark of the beast.
So what exactly is the rapture, and why has it traumatized so many people, especially former church kids? My name is Liz. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I like to talk about all sorts of things that interest me. Sometimes it's lifestyle, sometimes it's travel. We have a little bit of everything on this channel. I grew up in the Institute in Basic Life Principles cult, and I went to a Christian college, so I feel like I have some sort of personal authority on the subject matter of evangelical fundy land. And I'm excited to delve into this topic. Why have I been thinking about it lately? Well, because when the new pope was chosen, I thought it was fascinating how many people were interested in the new pope. Because as a kid who grew up in evangelical fundy land, the pope was all that was evil in the world. He was a symbol of the Antichrist. So I wanted to delve deep into where all this anxiety came, fearing popes, fearing world governments, and a lot of that goes back to the theology of the rapture. And so we're going to delve deep into that today. The rapture is actually a relatively modern Christian doctrine that seems to have developed in the United States in the 1830s. The rapture is a specific doctrine of Baptist-oriented Protestant denominations. It is not a doctrine of, let's say, Lutheran or Anglican or even Catholic-leaning denominations. So it is because those denominations have their largest footprint in the United States, it is a very American-centric doctrine. So what exactly is it? So when it comes to the end of the world, Christians have varying beliefs over what will happen. Some Christians believe that one day Christ will return to earth and rule for 1,000 years. Before the 1830s, a lot of Christians seem to have the idea that Christ would only return when we have brought in his new kingdom by making the world perfect. If you read the writings of the Founding Fathers and the Puritans, you can see this bleed into their writing. They are creating a new city on a hill where Christ will reign. But by the 1830s into the 1840s, that doctrine seems to have faded into this belief that we do not need to create a new city, that Christ himself will return and create that new city. But before Christ can return to earth, there will be 7 years of tribulation when the Antichrist will run the world. Different people who believe in the tribulation believe different things about a rapture. Some people believe that Christians will be taken to heaven and raptured before the tribulation. Some people believe that it will happen in the middle of the 7-year tribulation. And some people believe it will not happen at all until the very end. But the most popular, I would say the most popular strain of belief is that Christians will be raptured before the 7 years of tribulations, because most people believe the 7-year tribulation is a punishment for the people on earth who have rejected the teachings of Christ. I realized I didn't read the part of the Bible that talks about the rapture, and this is where it comes from. This is the specific passage of scripture that is used to create this theology. It is a letter from the Apostle Paul to the church at Thessalonica, and they are dealing with a lot of death, and they are trying to live in first century Roman Empire, with dealing with people loss. And this is what he writes to them. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who has no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not go before those who have died. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Where does the 7-year tribulation comes from? It comes from different passages in the book of Revelation.
And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain, and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared.
People believe this is going to happen during the 7-year tribulation, and that it will every year, like, one of these bad things is going to happen. But they believe that people who believed in Jesus before the tribulation started were raptured or taken away up to heaven. And they quote this passage that Paul wrote, I think it's in Thessalonians, talking about a trumpet sounding and everyone on earth who believes in Jesus being taken up, full body, just like lifted up into heaven and taken away. In this theology, people believe anyone who converts to Jesus and lives after the rapture will get to reign with Christ during his 1,000-year return. They believe there's going to be 7 years. So it's like this: rapture, 7 years of tribulation. You can believe in Jesus during the 7 years, but you will be persecuted, you will be punished. Like, the people on earth will not accept people who believe in Jesus. After 7 years, all these great, terrible things will happen. The sky will fall, like the sea will turn to blood, like all these terrible things it prophesies. And then after the 7 years, Jesus himself will return with the clouds of glory and blah, blah, blah. That's what it says in the Bible. I'm not mocking it, I'm just saying that's where they're taking it from. And when he returns, there will be 1,000-year reign on the earth. If you believed in Jesus during those 7 years, you will live for 1,000 years with him in his reign. Now, not most of Christendom, or most of Christian history, I could say, they did not believe this was literal. They read the book of Revelations and they thought it was like prophecies about the fall of the Roman Empire, or they thought it was about something that had already happened. Before the 1800s, when people read the Revelations, they did not say, how does this apply to me and how will I live as this applies to me? But in America, a very American-centric theology was created. Starting in the 1890s with the rise of Zionism, many people believed that the nation of Israel needed to be formed in order for these prophecies to be fulfilled, because Revelations talks about Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. And so these people believed that the only way for the rapture to happen and the 7-year tribulations to happen was for a modern nation state of Israel to be created. As long as Israel did not exist as a country, rapture theology was not very popular. But after World War II, when Israel was created as a country, rapture theology became a predominant way of belief among prominent American evangelicals, like Billy Graham, let's say. It's just something they believed, and it just kind of infiltrated American Christianity, even among people who had never believed in the rapture, among denominations that did not actually believe in a literal rapture or a 7-year tribulation. Rapture theology just became a normal way of thinking about the end of the world and the end times and America's place in that. And as part of this, there was a series of books that were published to help just permeate this theology into the world. And one you may not have heard of, because I think this is the only one of the series of books that I did not know about. And it was a best-selling nonfiction book in the 1970s. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth. Over 28 million copies of this book have been sold, and the book has been translated into 54 languages. It was probably the first mega seller about the end times that used this theology to try to interpret what was happening in modern times, to try to say politically what was happening in the Middle East and with Russia in the Cold War was related to the end times. They were trying to see the world through their version of theology. And what's interesting is Orson Welles actually adapted this book into a feature-length film. I tried to watch it. It was very, very boring. It's a documentary highlighting the key points of the book with current politics in the 1970s that were happening in the Middle East. They were like re-dramatizations of like biblical events plus modern news. It's a very, very boring movie. I don't recommend watching it. But what's interesting about it is it kind of highlights what current American politicians at the time were believing. Ronald Reagan actually believed in a literal rapture and that there was going to be a 7-year tribulation. And because of this, it actually influenced how he approached his foreign policy. Not only was these kind of people thought that America was like the center of God's kingdom, like America and Israel, and that everybody else was America and Israel's enemies and had to be defeated in order for Christ to come back. So religious historian Crawford Grippen says, the late great planet Earth exercised enormous influence inside Reagan's White House and a number of cabinet members. Significantly, it was a speech to the National Association of Evangelicals in 1983 that Reagan made his apocalyptic reference to the evil empire of the USSR, and the late great planet Earth was central to this emerging political theology platform. The Pentagon was briefed, as well as military intelligence committees and staff at the State Department and the American War College, and there is some evidence that some in the military elite were attracted to this analysis that the USSR was the evil kingdom and revelation that fought against Israel and the army of Christ at Armageddon. That's crazy. Like, that you're reading Revelation and you're deciding that the USSR is the evil Babylon that's mentioned in the book of Revelation and therefore needs to be defeated both currently politically but also in order to usher in the reign of Christ. That's just messed up. The late great planet Earth later led to the creation of a movie that went on to traumatize generations of church kids, and that is the 1973 feature film from the Christian feature film A Thief in the Night. This movie is so bad. Like, I was watching it, and honestly, I found out it was entirely filmed in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was not surprised because it is the staging and the production value is laughably bad. But it was like shared in churches all across the United States. It was a very, very popular tool in order to scare children into believing in Jesus to protect themselves from the end times. The story follows Patty, who goes to church, but according to the evangelical world, she's not a real Christian. So the rapture happens, her husband is raptured, but she is, quote, left behind. With the world in chaos, who emerges as the villain but the UN? Because in Revelation, it mentions that there will be a one world government and that everyone will be required to take a mark of the beast. And in the 1970s, the UN was very easily the villain and became the villain in almost all of these Left Behind theology books. The UN is the villain. But it's really funny in this movie because you have like the UN taking over the world, and it's all in Des Moines, Iowa. So the UN has a strong presence apparently in Iowa. And it says that everybody will have a mark of the beast in their hand. In the movie, everybody's like scanning their hand at the checkout aisle. And I thought that was really funny because growing up, I was told the barcodes in your clothes were going to be part of the mark of the beast. Like, everything in Christian fundy land is going to be part of the mark of the beast. Your social security code, like everything that the government uses to like identify you is feared as eventually going to be a mark of the beast. And in 2025, I'm sure that people think Real ID is going to be part of the mark of the beast. Like, there's a lot of fear mongering about that. The films were classified as Christian horror because they are really horrible. Like, not only they're horrible to watch, but they're kind of scary for a child. You're seeing people be literally guillotined and being told that you will be persecuted and hunted down by the UN if you believe in Jesus. There's a scene in the movie that's genuinely so awful where they have a 5-year-old boy being threatened with being guillotined because he believes in Jesus, and I think the movie implies that he is killed. A Thief in the Night continued to be shown in churches throughout the 80s and 90s, even into the 2000s. And there was just this like frenzy of end time fear circulating throughout the church. And a lot of people attribute it to the chaos that was the 80s and 90s. It's hard to imagine a more chaotic time than the 2020s, but apparently the 80s and 90s were like a very unsettling time for a lot of Americans. We had the Gulf War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and other global events that were interpreted as signs of the end times, fueling the belief that the end was near and they needed to prepare everyone for the return of Jesus. The 90s seemed to offer event after event that stirred up fears and conspiracies for the evangelical church, and that fear leaked into popular culture as we prepped and counted down for Y2K. And it was during the 90s that there was a very popular book series that was published that is like the culmination of all of this rapture theology wrapped into one of the most popular book series of all time, and that is the Left Behind book series. Left Behind became what A Thief in the Night just could not become. It was a thriller with quick pacing, actual compelling characters, and enough of an unpredictable plot to keep you on your toes. One New York Times wrote, on one level, the attraction of the Left Behind books isn't that they were that different from Tom Clancy or Stephen King. The plot is brisk and the characters Manichean. People disappear and things blow up. We all love a spy thriller, and that's what Left Behind was. Another writer said the books were the culmination of a century of American-centric theology, placing America, evangelical Christians, at the center of global conflicts, fighting a spiritual battle against the successor of the UN, headed by the Antichrist, which in part seeks to usurp the power of the United States government for a one-world government. The books are also infamously anti-Catholic. I was inspired to work on this video by the recent death of Pope Francis and the election of a new pope, who also happens to be American, so it's kind of interesting. But back in the 90s, the Pope was lumped into the fear of the UN and the end times. Growing up in a firmly Protestant foothold of the United States, I was surrounded by anti-Catholic end times theology. The Pope was often viewed as a potential Antichrist. The Left Behind series embraces that idea of the Pope being an Antichrist. Many Catholics were not raptured in the story, concluding that telling children and readers that Catholics are not actually Christians, and that the old Pope in the story is actually raptured, but he is described as, quote, promoting Lutheran reform within the Catholic Church, and that it is implied that he was not even a real Catholic. His successor in the Left Behind story, Pope Peter II, is actually renamed as Pontifex Maximus of Enigma Babylon One World Faith, which in the Left Behind story is a mix of all remaining world faith and religions that are led by the Antichrist along with the new Pope. They couldn't say the Antichrist is going to be Russian because that is that's too on the nose, which the Left Behind books were trying not to be on the nose. They were trying to be like thrillers and spies. So instead of the Antichrist being Russian, he is Romanian, which is another flavor of the USSR, Now, when it comes to the books being adapted, they are just leaps ahead of A Thief in the Night. They're just so much better quality. Maybe because they're not stuck to just filming in Des Moines, Iowa, and they're not just a random pastor in Des Moines, Iowa deciding to film a movie series. While they were box office bombs, they were really popular among American Christians, and they actually had certified actors in the movies. Kirk Cameron was an instrumental face of Left Behind, and it kind of launched his Christian influencer actor trajectory, so yay for him, I guess. I think I've only actually watched the first 2000 Left Behind movie. I remember watching it as a child and being told that everyone in my life was going to be raptured and I would be left behind at home, and that I would probably starve to death because they would be no one to cook me food. The movies where people went out to see them in theaters. I remember my foster family going out to see them in theaters. I think I watched it at home. I don't remember watching it in the theater. But they were a very big, popular movie in American churches. They were shown in American churches in the early 2000s. The series was also adapted into an entire young adult novelization. I think there's 27 young adult books that are derivative of the Left Behind books. They're literally just the story, but told from the perspective of teenagers. And they also created 2 graphic novels of the first 2 books. These books, combined with the movies, created a whole generation of kids who were traumatized by being told they were going to be left behind. They also tried to make a reboot of the series in the 2010s with Nicolas Cage. You could say his acting is at least marginally better than Kirk Cameron, but the reboot failed because, surprise, surprise, end times theology was not as popular in the 2010s. I think apocalyptic horror only works if you're not using it as a way to punish people who don't believe in your religion. There is apocalyptic horror that is box office success, but it's also not a sermon, and Left Behind was always going to be a sermon wrapped up in apocalyptic horror. Honestly, it kind of makes me sick what this genre of Christian movies and books were trying to do, scare people into believing in their theology, because we all know that the best reason to believe something is that you're scared not to believe it. I'm totally being facetious there. It's kind of strange to think of people joining your church or converting because they were scared that they were going to spend 7 years of tribulation and literal hell on earth because they didn't believe in what you believe about Jesus. And I wonder how many the growth of evangelical populations in like the 90s and 2000s was tied to this fear-based theology. And when you're constantly warning that the end of the world is near and that doesn't turn into reality, I think it leads to people leaving that fear-based faith. I was told multiple times that like Obama was an antichrist, that Hillary Clinton was going to usher in the end of the world. And when I'm 12, 14, 17, 18, being hammered with this kind of rhetoric that the end of the world is at hand and any moment now Jesus will return and the Antichrist will rise, when you're in your early 20s and none of the prophecies that you were told growing up have come to any sort of fruition, it kind of leads you like in doubt of the entire backbone of this faith. Like, if this faith is all based in fear, then how am I going to live? And like it hampers your ability to live, because what's the point of going to college? What's the point of saving money? What's the point of investing in your future if at any moment the world is going to end because of a random faith that you believe in? I will say that right before I went to college, I was working at a Christian summer camp, and it was during a time when there was some like interesting things happening in the stars. Like, I think Jupiter was like, I don't know, there was like some eclipse or something like that. And what was told to me was like, oh, this eclipse hasn't happened in 2,000 years. That means the return of Christ is inevitable. And I was literally told, like, there's no point in you going to college because, like, Jesus could return at the end of the year. And so you're wasting all of your money, and you should spend that money on, like, reaching new people with the gospel and building a safe house in case the tribulation starts. And I was like, okay, but if Jesus returns, I still want to be in college. Like, I believe that the rapture will happen and then the tribulation, so I don't think I will need a safe house. But I was told to pack a go bag when I went to school, like a go bag so I could run into the mountains of South Carolina and hide in case the Antichrist was to emerge in the American government. This is right after people thought Hillary Clinton was going to be elected, but Trump was elected. So I guess that fear went away when Trump was elected instead of Hillary. But I'm thinking back on this and how much I was told to not invest in my future because the end of the world was at hand, and how skeptical I became then of all of that form of theology when it turned out everything they were saying was just their own fear and made up beliefs, impacting their lives and trying to control mine with this fear-based theology. Because I really did think it was about control more than it was fearing that the end of the world was at hand. Though it was a mix of both, I think, for these people. Because I really did think the world was ending, but they also wanted a reason to keep me from going to college. I hope that all makes sense. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, the reboot of Left Behind failed, and I think a lot of people have just like stopped investing in end times media and end times theology and in the mainstream culture. While the popularity of end times theology in mainstream culture has lessened, the tendency of Christian leaders to use the end times to maintain their control has not. Now, instead of Hollywood movies, Christian influencers and preachers can hop on YouTube or any other social media platform and proclaim that the end of the world is near. This constant barrage of fear-based preaching encourages people to view the world around them as their enemy, to see war and death as signs that the end times are near instead of political complacency and incompetency in our leadership. I mean by that, if you believe the end of the world is near, why push for a ceasefire in Gaza? Isn't that war necessary for Christ to return in the first place? In my life, as a child, I was taught that the Jewish temple must be rebuilt for Jesus to return. When Israeli authorities violate international law, that was celebrated in my community because it meant they were closer to rebuilding the temple, and that meant the end times were even nearer. American evangelicals reframe global events to fit their own narrative, pushing for absolutely evil foreign policy decisions and being actively complacent when it comes to war crimes in the Middle East because it fits their narrative of the end times. End times theology isn't going anywhere soon, unfortunately, But I hope this video will help you spot it when public leaders espouse it to push their own agendas, whether it's a public figure like a president or a public figure like a social media influencer or a local pastor. These scare tactics are used to control your life and also used to push for bad policy decisions that are framed as good for American evangelicals. I think once you've been made aware of where this end times theology comes from and how it impacts foreign policy, it's almost something that you can't unsee, and that will be, and you'll realize is like a doomsday version of foreign policy. Like, foreign policy is not, that their foreign policy decisions are not about actually helping people, but about ushering in the end of the world, which we should all push back against, because people's lives should not be used as pawns in a theological worldview. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Is enjoyed a good word to describe this video? I had a little bit of fun putting this video together, remembering all the mini sermons I heard that the end of the world was near, and so relieved that I no longer have to view the world as like an adversary that is trying to hunt me down and oppose my own belief system, because that was a terrible way to view the world growing up, in constant fear and and anxiety over what was happening in the news, and that it could actually be about making my faith system illegal. That's such a terrible. I'm sure I have a lot of anxiety about news now, but at least it's not because I think they're going to outlaw Christianity, because that was a terrible way to grow up, being afraid that any day the government was going to outlaw Christianity because Barack Obama was president, and he was clearly the Antichrist. If you've enjoyed this video, please tell me in the comments. You can give a like and subscribe. So thanks for watching, y'all. I will see y'all all around the internet. See ya.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.